I'll come by. I'll make sure you're working. Hey, how are you? All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a special combined Sunday school class. Joe is preaching at another church today, and so he is not here, and so I was going to have the teens over anyways. And I really like my study we've been doing on the book of Nehemiah, dealing with leadership. And today we're starting in chapter 2, dealing with a really, I think, important subject, which is dynamics of interpersonal leadership. And I find this topic to be fascinating and critical and honestly, in general, lacking. In general, the things we're going to talk about today, I think the average person lacks. And so I think this is very profitable. So I thought I'd just bring everybody in today. Now, I do want to give you a heads up. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a few moving parts in Sunday school. So next week, I'm going to be teaching the teen Sunday school class, and Brother Joe will be over here. The following week, the teens will be back over here, and Brother Joe is preaching out again at another church. So I'm going to have the teens 3 weeks in a row at least, and I might be back over there again teaching their Sunday school thereafter. We'll just see how it goes. So spending a little bit more time with the teens. I'm going to be preaching to them also at our in-house fellowship on the 24th. We're not going to Rhode Island. And so just want to spend some more time with our teenagers. But anyhow, dynamics of interpersonal relationship. We're in Nehemiah chapter 2. You know, why do some people succeed in management or leadership, if you will? Why do some succeed and others don't? I mean, why are some people good leaders and others bad? Why are some good at managing and why are others bad? What are common areas of weakness? How much pressure from above or tension below are actually effective and helpful in affecting a positive outcome? Here's an illustration. There's a young person hired out of graduate school. The company advertised and communicated in the interview process that they were looking for somebody who was innovative, on the ball, not afraid to make changes. And this person was offered this position, and they accepted it because they felt, the employer felt, this is the guy. He's innovative. He's got some fresh ideas. He's not afraid to make changes. However, it didn't take long for the person who got hired to realize he's not working with the guy who hired him. He's working with somebody else, and their boss that they're working with doesn't want an innovative person and doesn't want a person to make changes. And so everything they try to do, their immediate boss blocks them. And what are they supposed to do? You're hired to do a job. But then the person who's above you within the framework of that job blocks everything you're trying to do. That's a difficult position to be in, isn't it? That's what we would call middle management, which is a common place where a lot of people find themselves in various different situations in life. And you know, when you're in the middle, when you have people above you and people below you in a realm of authority, you have the challenge of being able to translate ideals of your superiors into practice. And at the same time, knowing how to motivate those who are below you. And you've got to keep corporate goals in mind. You got to, so in a church, like, you got to keep, what's the big picture? All right. What's the leadership of the pastor who's getting his leadership from God? What's his ideals? All right. But what are the people below me, and how do I make that work in your home, in your place of employment? All these principles come into play. You got to keep in mind the corporate goals, and while striving, while helping to keep individuals striving for individual goals. Now, in Nehemiah chapter 2, the principles of success in what we'll call middle management are described. From Nehemiah's example, we learn the importance of loyalty and tact. Loyalty and tact are absolutely critical when you are dealing with people above and below you. Now, you also need to learn how not to be polarizing. You understand what polarizing means? That means like somebody loves you or hates you. Like, there's no middle ground. You're either the best or the worst. That's polarizing. You don't want to be that. All right? Not when you're in a middle management type situation. So we also want to learn the technique of good questions. We also need to learn the way to administrate may be encouraged as we adopt ideas. We have to learn how to properly administrate. So as the chapter opens, Nehemiah is waiting for his prayer to be answered. If you go back, and I'll get some readers of the verses here just to save my voice today. Who would like to read for me? I'm going to have multiple readers. Abio, I would like you to set the context. Could you read Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 11?
Prayer of thy servant, and to the prayer of thy servant, who desire to fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant, and grant him in the mercy sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer.
Okay, so what we see here is at the end of the verse, he says, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. This man is the king. So what he's asking for is mercy or compassion, that the king would be compassionate towards him. Now, at a banquet, which the king's queen, and the Bible doesn't tell us this, but the history does, her name was Damaspia. She's present. Nehemiah brings wine to the king, and something about his disposition is not correct. Now, it could have been the look on his face or a look in his eyes. Remember, in the context, for those who haven't been in this series, he has been praying and fasting for 4 months because of the condition of Israel. This chapter 2 is preceded by chapter 1, which is really prayer. All right? He doesn't know what to do. He's got a problem. He can't fix it. And so when you have a problem you don't know how to fix, you go to God in prayer. He's been praying and fasting for 4 months, not knowing what to do. And he comes before the king. He's the cupbearer. So basically, he's the right-hand man to the king. He tastes the drink and eats the food before the king does to make sure no one's poisoning it. So imagine if he's not looking so well. Not exactly a desirable thing. And so he comes before him, and there's something about him. It's not a thing he said, but something about his disposition. And we talked about last week, he did his job, all right? When you are dealing with stuff, you can deal with it, but do your job. Don't show up to work moping, hanging your head down. No, for 4 months, he was overwhelmed with emotion to the point he was constantly fasting, constantly praying. It affected him, and for 4 months, he did his job very close to the king. The king didn't notice a thing. But at a certain point, when something's really bothering you, it eventually breaks through. And that's what we find happens here. We notice that the king sees something. Can I get another reader who'd like to read for me? Just raise your hand. Mark, sorry, your hand first. Read Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1.
And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sat in his presence.
All right, so the king is about to notice that something, Mark, go ahead and read verse 2 if you would.
Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then was I very sore afraid.
Okay, so the king sees him, and something's not right. Did he get information that somebody's after me? Could he have thought that? It's possible. But what he doesn't know for sure, but he knows Nehemiah is sad. And Nehemiah, through no fault of his own, finds himself in a situation that he didn't bring on, he didn't ask for, but it happened. And what we find here is so we find that he is sore afraid, okay? And so he's very, very afraid. So he's prayed to God for favor and blessing and guidance. And do you understand what the king's comment to him is? The fact that he's sad in his presence, you don't do that. You don't come before the king sad. Don't come before the king. You're to serve me. Don't bring your problems to me. To come into the presence of the king in that type of condition was to bring question upon your loyalty to the king. Now, what happens when your loyalty is questioned? That's a life-threatening situation, right? His loyalty to the king is now in question. So let's talk about some of the problems that we can have in leadership. I want you to see how he handles this problem because it's really, really good. Now, notice at verse 3, the first thing Nehemiah does is when his loyalty is called into question, when his conduct, when his disposition is, what's wrong with you? You're sad. Why? Look at the first thing he does. Verse 3, and he said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Now, the first thing he does is he assures the king of his loyalty. All right? If you're trying to get something done at work, for example, your boss better know you're loyal to him. Because if he thinks you're trying to work around him, you're toast. If you can't play ball with leadership, you're not going to get much done. And you can complain about them and say they're not right. Is it right for the king to be questioning this guy's loyalty after all these times? Is it right for the king to potentially kill him because he's sad? No, that would seem extreme to us. Well, have you noticed in the Bible that kings exactly weren't, logical sometimes? Have you ever noticed that some of the kings of the Bible were a little maniacal, a little crazy, a little overreacting? Because these people had complete power and nobody told them what to do. And so the first thing he does is he makes sure there is no question to his loyalty to the king. Let the king live forever. Now, because Nehemiah is allowed to continue to speak as to what's troubling him, it's clear the king believes him. In other words, if the king didn't believe what he said, he wouldn't have continued speaking. But because the king says, okay, I believe you, he's allowed to continue to talk. By assuring the king of Nehemiah's faithfulness to the crown, Nehemiah lays an important foundation for the explanation of his concern. Because if the king didn't believe Nehemiah, then his explanation wouldn't have been accepted. When you're working with people, they've got to believe that you're not trying to work against them, that you're not trying to work around them, that you're trying to work with them. You've got to lay the foundation of teamwork. And that's fundamental. Now, notice how Nehemiah answers the king's question. Can I get another reader? Who'd like to read for me? Logan, read all of verse 3, would you?
Forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's
Sepulchres.
sepulchres waste, and the gates thereof consumed with fire?
So now, first he's shown, let the king live forever, loyalty. Secondly, he's now showing tact. By answering the question with a question, he avoids being viewed as defensive. How many times do people ask us a question and our response is defensive? You don't win when you're defensive, because even if you've done nothing wrong, you look guilty. I'm not sad. Yeah, you are. Why are you asking? You lose. You see, in life, you have these small windows of time with certain people. They ask a question, and your one-time response that you have little to no time to think about is going to dictate how your relationship is going to go. He asks, why are you sad? And do you know what Nehemiah doesn't do? He doesn't try to justify himself. If he just tried to justify himself, as we often do, well, you don't understand. Well, let me explain. And we start justifying our behavior, we only make things worse. The more he attempted to explain the cause of his sorrow, the less credible his story becomes. So by answering the king as he did, Nehemiah avoids any unnecessary polarization. And we're going to understand more about this as we develop this. But what he's doing is, by asking the question, he's preserving unity with the king, the unity of the relationship, okay? The second example of Nehemiah's tact is found in his explanation, all right? Ancestral reverence he's in, the Babylon area, okay? And in that region, ancestral reverence was a big deal at that time. How many times in the Bible say, it talks about the fathers, all right? Like the descendants that have gone on. There is great respect for the ancestors that came before you. That was universal in that area. He uses that concept to his advantage. He refers to the desecration of the graves, that's the sepulchres, all right? The place of my father's sepulchres lieth waste. In other words, my descendants' graves have been desecrated. Culturally, he is now appealing to something that the king can understand and sympathize with, because that is not acceptable to anybody, that their descendants' graves should be desecrated. Doesn't matter who you are. Culturally, that is unacceptable. And by saying this, he is drawing the king's sympathies. Now, notice in this, in fact, notice, you'll see it as we go through the chapter. Nehemiah does not mention the name of the city of his fathers. You will find he does not mention Jerusalem at all. That's the city he's talking about. But he doesn't mention it. This is not deceit. This is a judicious avoidance of a potentially controversial subject. Why? Jerusalem is a troublesome city, has a history of a troublesome city. The king already knows Nehemiah's ethnic origin. He knows he's Jewish. Right? He knows he's Jewish. But Nehemiah wisely doesn't bring up specifics of where he's thinking about, because he doesn't want to chance stirring up the king's unfavorable memories of that city. Nehemiah's task is doubly hard because he desires permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls, which is the very thing the same king, had already forbidden back in Ezra chapter 4, verses 17 through 22. They were trying to rebuild the walls, and the same king said no. That he did some research on the history of Jerusalem and found that they were troublemakers in his eyes. And he stopped them from building Jerusalem. Same king. And Nehemiah is coming before him to ask the king the same question that he already said no to Ezra about. How do you think that's going to go when he finds all the details? In other words, he is in a very precarious situation. The king's already said no, so who's going to go ask the king a second time for something he's already said no? So what does Nehemiah do? He didn't bring up the city. Instead, looks at the facts. My father's sepulchres lie in waste. And that was true. It wasn't a lie. Nehemiah's handling of the situation shows the importance of, again, this word tact. It's how you present things. I've used this illustration. I actually heard it on the Cosby Show a long time ago. And I can't remember all the details of it, but I explained this to people this way. The lack of tact. All right? Picture a beautiful ribeye steak, properly seasoned. Ron's grilled it to perfection. And he brings it to you, served on a trash can lid. And says, it's a new lid. Doesn't that diminish the value? Yeah, well, most of us. Most normal people. All right? For you, you get the used little trash can lid, all right? And it depends where you're at. But he brings it on a trash can lid. Sometimes I tell people, I'm like, look, you're not wrong, but your delivery's horrible. You lacked tact. You lack understanding of the dynamics of interpersonal communication. So you're not wrong, but you're not going to get anybody to follow you that way. You're not going to get anybody to work with you that way because your delivery destroys the value of your content. And a lot of people are really bad at delivering truth. They lack tact. Nehemiah shows the importance of this. To be a tactful person doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the person says. Nor does it mean that we have to lie to keep from hurting others. Having tact is based on truth and character. And it shows an understanding of human nature. It involves knowing how to approach people and how to make requests known in an effective manner. Let's continue on. Let's see the clear mandate now. Can I get a reader in, let's see here. Who'd like to read verse 4 for me? Go ahead, read verse 4.
I'll make requests, so I pray.
All right, so Nehemiah's discretion touches the heart of the king. His ancestors' graves are in waste. That's awful. Nehemiah, how can I help? Which moved Nehemiah to offer a quick silent prayer. So I prayed to the God of heaven. Now, he didn't stop. He just said, Lord, help me now. Friends, I want to tell you right now. You know, when someone comes up to you and says, hey, can I talk to you? Like at work, hey, can I talk to you? Can you come in my office? Yeah. Nothing wrong with saying, Lord, I don't know what's about to be said. Help me. You don't know what's coming next. It's not like, hey, hold on, I got to go have a prayer meeting. No, come in the office as you're walking in. Silent prayer. Lord, give me wisdom right now. Lord, help me right now. Lord, give me the right words. That's all you got time for. That's exactly what Nehemiah did. That's a good prayer. That's a wise prayer. Because you know what you're doing? You're saying, God, come on in. It might be a two-person meeting, but there's a third one here they don't know about. Because I just invited you in. Bring God in. It's nice to have lengthy times of prayer, but that's not always possible. So right before a big meeting, sometimes you might know you're having a big meeting. Hey, God, just help me in this. All right? That's good. Now, in response to the king's general question, I love this. Nehemiah's ready. He's very specific in his responses. Look, let's see, I need another reader. Suzanne, can read verse 5, and then Roger reads verse 7 and 8, and just go back to back, all right?
I got new glasses, we're working on. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as
Are you in Nehemiah 2, verse 5? That's okay.
And I said unto the king, the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my fathers, sepulchres, that I may build it.
Very good. And Roger, read verse 7 and 8.
Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come to Judah. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertained to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me.
I love this. So the king's like, Nehemiah, man, that's awful. How can I help? I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. He was ready. He was prepared. He did not know how God was going to work it out, but he knew God would. And through those 4 months of prayer, God had been working on him on what he needed to do and what he was going to need to do it. And so he says, Nehemiah wanted it to be known that first the king has sent me. Why? Because it's the king that stopped the job beforehand. So first things first, I have approval for everything I'm going to do. The king himself has sent me. Secondly, he needed a safe place while he was away from the palace. He wanted security. Why? Because he knew it wouldn't be well received. He knew the travel was dangerous, so he wanted security in the travel, and he wanted a safe place. He wanted the supplies he would need. Nehemiah had done his homework, and he knew exactly what he needed. Nehemiah's opening statement contains an important principles for those that find themselves in this leadership role where you're between an authority. And guys, we always have an authority. All right? I have an authority. All right? You have an authority. We always have someone over us. And if you're any type of leader, you always have people under you. Now, we will not get far with our new ideas if we do not involve our bosses in what we have to suggest. Notice in verse 5, he says, and I said to the king, if it please the king. If you are okay with this, I need this, this, and this. Notice the submission. Notice how it's a preface to the statement because Nehemiah preserves the king's authority. I'll be honest. As a pastor, I'm not a king. I don't like guys that portray the pastorate as a king. They're not kings, okay? Kings are a governmental position, all right? I am not in the government. I'm in the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ, which is not a political entity. It's the church, it's Jesus' church. Now, with that said, does the pastor have an element of authority? He does, right? He does. Now, do some take it too far? Yes. Do some not exert their authority? Yes. both are problematic, and you've got to be balanced biblically. All right? Like, I'll preach on this, it'll probably be a month or two away, but in Hebrews 13, for example, it says that I watch for your souls. There's no other person that watches for your souls like the pastor does. Okay? So that's a unique position. Now, but I'll be honest with you, given I do have the oversight of the local church under the guidance and direction of Jesus, okay? And so I have the oversight. In other words, think of it like this. There's only one person that that Jesus is going to sit down and say, talk to me about Lifeline Baptist Church. There's only one person in the room that's going to do that, to have that conversation, and that's me. So, Chris, this over here and this, why'd you let that happen? Because my word says this. Well, how come you did this? Because, that's not how I tell you in my word. So I have to give an account. Therefore, I have oversight to make decisions because at the end of the day, you're going to give an account for you. I give an account for the church. So if you ever disagree with me on something, you have that right, and I respect that. But please understand the position I'm in. You're not going to give an account for the church. I will. So that gives me a position to make some decision. And if I'm wrong, pray the Lord open my eyes. But what I don't like, and it doesn't really happen, but it is, I'll tell you from an authority perspective, when people try to go around you, that's annoying. And if you do that at your job, if you try to work around your boss, you're going to have problems. I promise you. If it pleased the king. That's the key. He says, look, I've thought this through, but I'm not, only if you're on board, only if this pleases you, are we going to do it. Now, notice the wiseness of Nehemiah in this situation, even as he starts to give more detail about what he's going to do. You notice this, there's no reference to the city, is there? Now, he does say the province of Judah, the city of his fathers, verse 5, but he never says Jerusalem. Why? Because the minute he says Jerusalem, that's going to be a problem. And you ever notice that sometimes people would be initially resistant to something, but after a little while, once they figure out like they've kind of committed themselves, they'll let things go? That's exactly what he does here. He doesn't mention Jerusalem. He's truthful. The city of my fathers, to Judah, which is a region, not a city. Nehemiah makes no reference to and the other thing he doesn't do? He doesn't bring up the past. He makes no references to the king's previous decision in Ezra 4, verse 21. It says, give ye now commandment to cause these men to cease, and that the city be not builded until another commandment shall be given from me. Artaxerxes gave that a commandment in Ezra 4:21 about Jerusalem. You know what Nehemiah does? He doesn't bring it up. Don't bring up a sore subject from the past that's just going to impede what you're trying to do. If the king remembers it, let him remember it, but if he doesn't, don't worry about it. If your boss remembers it, let him remember it, but don't bring it up. Hey, I really want to do this thing. Now, I know that you said no before because of all these problems. If you do that, I can promise you it won't work. You're not going to accomplish anything if you start bringing up the past, which means in order for Nehemiah to be successful, the king is going to have to amend his position. But the only question the king asked was, how long is your journey going to be and when are you going to return? Someone read verse 6. Who'd like to read? I want to get other people. Gabby's there you go. Hunter, go ahead. Read verse 6.
Chapter 2.
Yeah.
And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time.
Now, you know what's interesting is that time actually is 12 years. He said, why would the king give him 12 years? You know the Lord's timing's perfect in everything. You see, from the time Ezra was stopped to the time of Nehemiah, some things have changed. See, he's the king, but 2 years prior to the events of Nehemiah, there had been a revolt by the king in Syria. Syria is to the north of Jerusalem and north of Israel. There was a revolt by the king of Syria. But for political reasons, while that revolt was put down, for political reasons, that king was allowed to stay in power. That the ousting of that king would have caused more political fallback than Artaxerxes wanted. And so that king remained in power. And there was this growing fear within the empire that Syria could unite with Egypt. And if they united, could stand as a real threat. Now, they weren't, but there was fear that they would. Now, how do you get from Syria to Egypt? You travel south through Israel. And you see what the king is starting to think? This is my right-hand man. If he goes back there and can build his city and be a stronghold, he's loyal to me. And now I've got more political stability in a region that will not allow these two entities to travel to one another without resistance. He probably had been thinking about, how am I going to do this? How's this going to work? Because remember, kings are lonely people and don't trust anybody. Who can I trust? Everybody's trying to kill you when you're the king. It's a very lonely life. And we see that he allows them to go for an extended period of time, probably because of the political dynamic that was developing at that time. So Nehemiah's request, designed by God, comes at the perfect time. So what do we learn from Nehemiah's success in handling the situation? Nehemiah's success in presenting his position to the king can be attributed to the fact that first, he was prepared ahead of time. And when given the opportunity, he knew exactly what to ask for, and he was very mindful of what to say and what not to say. And that preparation comes out of 4 months of prayer, where God began to show him how he would answer that prayer. Nehemiah knew there would be opposition locally. That's why he won those letters, proving he was allowed to do what he was going to do. He also knew he would need safe passage to the various provinces. Being a Jew, there would be those that dislike him. He also made sure that he'd have access to the supplies that he would need. You know, sometimes people fail, not just because they're not prepared, but because they're not given permission, or not because they're not, sometimes people fail, not because they're not given permission, but because they aren't prepared. Think about it. What if this happened, but he had no preparation? What do you need? Oh, man, I just need to go. All right, go. Would he have succeeded? No, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have succeeded. Sometimes in life, there are people that are really good at coming up with ideas. Hey, you know, we need to do this. We need to do, Pastor, let's do this. That's great. But you got to think it through. You got to think through the logistics. You got to think through. And I start asking questions. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Well, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that. You got to be prepared. When you want to go do something, you got to think through all the logistics of it ahead of time and then present it. Here, I'll give you this honest thing from a pastoral perspective. Sometimes you guys have great ideas, right? But if your idea is to make me more busy, with your idea, I may not be so excited about it as you are. You understand? It's not like I sit around at home like, man, what can I do today? I really don't have anything to do. Lord, what more can I? No, I don't have that problem. All right? Now, let me just hit the pause button and say this, because this is something I want to be clear on. I'm never too busy for you. Understand, in a church, the people, Jesus is preeminent. We understand that. But from my perspective, the people are the priority. All right? Not the program, not the in other words, if you need me, I'm there. And other stuff can be pushed off. All right? The people are the priority, not the programs. So don't ever say, well, I'd like to talk to Pastor, but he's just so busy. I know he's busy. I don't want to make him any more busy. You're misunderstanding. I am busy, but there's tiers of things that are important. And people are at the priority, all right? The preparation for the messages is important. Prayer is important, and people, all right? But if I'm working on a budget and you call with a Bible question, guess what gets precedent? The Bible question, because budgets are boring. All right? Yeah, but they are boring. I don't mind doing them. It's just mindless number crunching. It's a nice reprieve sometimes. But the point is this, is that the people are the priority. Now, Nehemiah, all right, sometimes people fail because they don't properly prepare. They don't get the proper things they need in an appropriate amount of time. Nehemiah was prepared for the interview with the king as much as he could be. And when the king granted him his request, Nehemiah does not for a moment talk about his preparation. Notice verse 8. Look at verse 8. And look at the end of the verse. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Do you know when Nehemiah gets everything he wanted, do you know what he does? He doesn't say one word about his preparation. He says, and the king gave me everything I asked for because of God. He gave God the glory and the praise for his success. Now, let's, for the last few minutes, get into this component here of the impossible dream. See, God works in human affairs to accomplish his purpose. The work that had begun 4 months earlier really was an impossibility. But now, 4 months later, is appearing more possible. Why? Because of prayer, preparation, and perseverance. He didn't quit. He was prepared, and he kept praying. Praying is the deliberate identification with God and his purpose. Many Christians can testify of the power of prayer because prayer is asking God to do what we can't. Think about it. Why do we pray about something? Because we can't do it. Nehemiah was also an astute student of human nature. I think that's where sometimes we lack. And it's not surprising the amount of time we spend on computers and not actually verbally communicating with people, but through digital communication. We really do lose the understanding of human nature. All right? And I can't stand here and tell you that I am the master at understanding human nature, but here's what I can tell you. I have improved dramatically in the understanding of how people respond. I was just speaking with another pastor last night. He has an issue, and it's not the end of the world, but it's something that does need to be addressed with one of their members. And I said, look, you got to make a decision. given everything you're telling me, if you come right at them, they're gone. And maybe that's what the Lord wants you to do, but I don't feel like that's the first step. The person's never, newer Christian who's never been through discipleship. I said, I would press the discipleship. Take 3-4 months and see if the subject issue that's concerning to you comes up in discussion. If they bring it up, the better. Because then you can answer their question honestly and have prayer with them, and you look like you're a team. Now, if it doesn't come up by the end of discipleship, then you graciously and with much humility bring it up. And you take that risk then, but you're less likely to lose them because they know you've just invested in them. And there's a camaraderie there. But if you come straight at them, I think they're gone. But the Bible calls people sheep. No one likes to be called a sheep, but that's what the Bible calls us. And you know what sheep are? Skittish. They run away real quick. And often have learned through mistake that if you come at people too hard, too fast, they're gone. And they might be serviceable in the work of the Lord. It doesn't mean they're right, but how we handle it is so critical. So Nehemiah was a student of human nature. He prepared himself as well as he could. He was familiar with the king's plans and ambitions, problems and anxieties. And it helped him to see the sensitivity that he appealed to the king. It helped him. His approach highlights the importance of loyalty and tact, and also the need for advanced preparation and the importance of avoiding any unnecessary polarizing issues. He didn't bring up Jerusalem. He didn't bring it up because it would have killed the whole thing. He didn't bring up his previous decree. Why? It would have killed the whole thing. Lastly, make sure you preserve your superior's autonomy. Don't infringe upon their authority. If you do, you don't win. You're not going to get them to go along. If they think, even sniff, that you're infringing on their authority, they're not going to work with you. All right? They're not going to work with you. Human nature, and we'll just go a minute or two over today, will also lead us to be cautious because you can't trust everybody you meet. You know, people get jealous very easily. You know, when we take on a new assignment, we should make sure that we have public clarification of our role so that others will not hinder us from carrying out the task that's been given us. That's why Nehemiah got the letters. He got the letters to prove to everybody, I have the authority to do this. Did he still have problems? He did. Even with authority, he still had problems. But just imagine how bad his problems would have been if he didn't have the public clearance to do it. All right? It would have been worse. So make sure that you limit these things. Lastly, we see the perseverance. Nehemiah did not stop after he was granted his initial request, but continued to petition all of his needs. So if we study personalities about those of those around us, knowing how to get along with people is really important. You know, promotions oftentimes come because a subordinate's sympathetic understanding of his superior's problems. In other words, how do promotions often happen in the world? Somebody likes you. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the truth. And when you are understanding of your superior's situation, you're more apt to be promoted. And those who have studied the characteristics of people whom they work with, those that are equal to them, along with those who are above or below, these people will be more useful to their employees and in general more successful. In other words, if you're the boss and you sympathize with the people below you, that makes them want to work for you more. If you're just a jerk to them, that doesn't make them want to work with you more. it's this is not being fake. Because if you're fake about it, that'll get found out. All right? This is being genuine. All right? It's like, our children's workers. I know it's not always an easy job. Sometimes they're, wild, feral. I've been there. I understand. It's not always easy to keep control of that class, but keep control of it. You can do it, all right? You don't even need duct tape too often. Just don't need duct tape at all right? I've been there. Jen and I have been there. We taught 34-year-olds for an hour and a half. Not lying, 30 in a tiny little room. I saw the room. I cannot believe we fit 30 kids in there. I saw the room when I was down for the funeral. I looked at it. I said, I just want to look at it to make sure it's not, like, how sometimes you remember something and you're like, oh, I'm exaggerating how small it was. So I went and looked at it. I'm like, oh, my word. No windows? It's like a closet. Like, they literally, I think we might have stacked them on top of each other. I really don't know. I'm like, how on earth do we fit 30 kids? You know what it is? They're little. They're little, so you can fit a lot of little kids in there. All right, guys, listen, that's the lesson for today. Thank you so much for everybody being here. I was telling the prayer group this morning, sometimes I get a lesson that just excites me, and then I preach it, teach it, whatever, and people are like, oh, yeah, that was good. Yeah. And it was probably more for me than anybody else, but I just was excited about this and wanted to share it with everybody. I hope it was half the blessing to you as it was to me. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the day. Bless the service to follow. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, got about 10 minutes.